I stepped into the grand hall, heart pounding, trying to keep my shoulders straight as laughter and chatter swirled around me. The moment I appeared, my cousins smirked and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Look who showed up, the family beggar." A hush fell over the room, and all eyes shifted toward me, sharp and judging. My stomach sank, a mix of heat and ice coursing through me. I felt invisible and exposed at once, like a glass ornament ready to shatter. Memories of every slight, every ignored birthday, every whispered insult surged through me, each one cutting deeper. I wanted to vanish, to shrink into the shadows, but I forced my feet forward. I scanned the faces, noting the amusement in their eyes, the casual cruelty in their smiles. How had it come to this? I had tried to belong, to fit in, but it was always conditional, always a performance for their approval. And now, standing there in my quiet defiance, I realized how deeply I had been underestimated, how blind they were to the person I had quietly become. As I moved through the room, I couldn't help but notice the familiar patterns playing out again. My family had always favored one sibling over me, celebrating their achievements while barely acknowledging my own. Every laugh, every toast seemed reserved for someone else, leaving me on the sidelines. I remembered past birthdays, the way my efforts were dismissed, the small gestures ignored. At last year's gathering, my carefully prepared gift was tossed aside as if it meant nothing, while my cousin's trivial accomplishment was praised endlessly. Even the smallest successes of mine were minimized or forgotten. Their arrogance wasn't subtle. It was a constant, quiet attack, wrapped in smiles and polite applause. And yet, beneath the sting of their disregard, I felt something simmering, a quiet determination that had been building unnoticed. They thought I was weak, overlooked, and powerless, but each slight had only strengthened my resolve. Somewhere inside, a hidden force was growing, a readiness to prove that the beggar they mocked had quietly become someone they could never have imagined. That night, as I lay awake replaying every humiliating word, a quiet fire ignited within me. I promised myself, silently but fiercely, that their insults would never define who I was, or who I could become. No longer would I wait for their approval or validation. I began taking small steps toward independence, quietly researching investments, side projects, and opportunities they would never suspect. While they flaunted wealth and status, I learned to move in the shadows, building quietly, unseen. Every family gathering where they dismissed me, every laugh at my expense, became a subtle motivator, a whisper in my mind reminding me that they would never see it coming. I imagined their surprise when the one they labeled a beggar quietly rose above, achieving what they thought impossible. The thrill of that secret future drove me forward, and I realized how their underestimation was my greatest advantage. They were blind to my ambition, unaware that every small step I took was bringing me closer to a reckoning they could never anticipate. I threw myself into every opportunity I could find, learning the rules of money, of influence, of power that my family had taken for granted. I started small, investments in overlooked stocks, side businesses I ran from my tiny apartment. But each success compounded, slowly building a foundation they could never imagine. Nights blurred into mornings as I studied contracts, market trends, and strategies, delighting in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was creating something they would never see. Every family gathering became a stage where their arrogance played out like a comedy, and I, the supposedly powerless one, silently counted my victories. I watched them flaunt wealth, belittle others, and assume superiority, never realizing that the beggar they mocked had quietly amassed control over assets, companies, and opportunities they would never guess. With every deal closed, I felt a growing sense of power, not loud or boastful, but deep, assured, unstoppable. I smiled to myself at their ignorance, knowing the first reversal of fortune was already mine. They had built their arrogance on my underestimation, and soon everything would shift. The invisible empire I had grown in shadows was now my secret advantage, my quiet triumph, and my first taste of true revenge. When they announced the next celebration, the words landed like a dare. My aunt clinked her glass and said, with that rehearsed sweetness everyone knew too well, "We'll need the whole family there this year, especially those who've been so distant." A few forced laughs, an eye roll from my cousin, and the room already decided my place again. They didn't invite me because they wanted me. They invited me because it would be amusing to have the family beggar show up like a curiosity. I heard the unspoken assumption in every syllable. You'll come, we'll laugh, and nothing will change. I could have stayed away. I could have let the insult settle into another forgotten bruise. Instead, I accepted the invitation like a quiet puzzle piece snapping into position. Not loudly, not with a post or a message to prove anything. Just the simple, unremarkable reply that concealed everything. Yes. Their confidence in my absence became a weapon I chose not to disarm. In the days that followed, I played my part with careful calm. I RSVP'd. I pretended to be nervous about what to wear. I asked about dietary restrictions as if I cared about the menu. Each small interaction was a thread I tied into a larger web. Meanwhile, they continued their performances of superiority, discussing seating charts, comparing gifts, and name-dropping the caterer as if the brand alone declared their worth. They bragged about who they'd brought, who had the best table, and which family member had the most exclusive contact. Their chatter, loud and unguarded, offered me exactly what I needed. I listened, catalogued, and smiled inwardly. Every boast they made was a data point. When my cousin bragged about the exclusive florist he'd hired, I noted the company name. When my uncle boasted about the venue's owner being a longtime friend, I filed that away. Their arrogance was rich with details I could use, and they handed me the tools without thinking twice. There were nights I lay awake picturing the scene. How I would enter. What faces would register surprise first, which mouths would falter mid-sentence. I rehearsed small lines in my head, practiced a steady expression, and mapped the order of my reveals. The plan wasn't about cruelty. It was about a precise, undeniable truth landing where it would sting most, at their pride. I wanted them to feel the logical, cold impact of reality, not a melodramatic outburst. I also made sure to seed subtle FOMO. I let a mutual acquaintance think I'd be connecting with a new business contact during the event. A vague hint dropped in passing that suggested I had access to networks they didn't. I shared an image online, a shadowed skyline from a rooftop dinner, careful to hide any identifying markers. The goal wasn't to boast, but to plant doubt. If they suspected I was rising, even a little, their scorn could become brittle. On the day of the celebration, I packed light. I didn't wear a statement outfit. I wore a quiet dress that said nothing about wealth and everything about control. As I left my apartment, I felt the peculiar calm of someone who knows the map inside their head. Their invitations had been a trap only for those who loved performance. For me, it was a stage I'd already built the set for. The suspense tightened in my chest. How many of them would recognize that I had turned their very celebration into my opportunity? Would their laughter become the sound of their own unraveling when the truth came out? Or would they simply laugh harder, blind as ever? I wanted them to feel the exact weight of the surprise I was carrying. That night, I stepped into the hall wearing a simple dress, understated shoes, and nothing that might hint at the life I had quietly built. My heart beat steady, not with fear, but with the thrill of anticipation. As I moved through the crowd, I heard the murmurs and felt the subtle shifts in posture. My family scanning me, ready to smirk, ready to mock. "Look at her," my cousin whispered loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Still pretending she belongs here." Laughter rippled around the room, warm and cruel. My aunt tisked, shaking her head in exaggerated pity. They didn't see the calm confidence beneath my modest exterior. To them, I was still the weak, overlooked sibling. I allowed their assumptions to settle around me, letting them feel dominant, smug in their belief that nothing about me had changed. Every boast, every condescending remark became a thread I wove silently into my awareness. I listened carefully as they discussed seating, gifts, and their triumphs, their voices rich with arrogance and ignorance. I smiled quietly to myself, savoring the contrast. Outside, I appeared meek and ordinary, exactly as they expected. Inside, I was calculating, aware, and far more powerful than they could imagine. Each jab, each whispered insult only reinforced the dramatic tension, setting the stage for the reversal they would never see coming. As I mingled, nodding politely at relatives who barely acknowledged me, I allowed my eyes to sweep the room with careful attention. Every detail, the flowers, the tables, the menu, was familiar to me in a way it couldn't be to anyone else. I'd chosen the caterer months ago, negotiated the contracts, and even confirmed the entertainment lineup personally. My ownership of the venue itself was quiet, hidden behind a business name no one in my family recognized. They assumed every choice had been theirs, that their superiority dictated the evening. And yet, every smile, every flourish, every meticulously arranged detail was under my control, a silent inversion of power they didn't even suspect. I felt a thrill as I watched them flaunt their assumed dominance, unaware that I had orchestrated it all. When my cousin bragged about the exclusive band, I let a soft smile curve my lips, saying nothing, keeping the truth locked behind my calm demeanor. Every glance at the decorations, every passing mention of the dessert selection, reminded me how carefully I'd planted these threads of influence. They believed they had the spotlight, that the success of the evening belonged to them. The thought of the reveal made my pulse quicken. How and when would I expose it? I toyed with different timings, different reactions, imagining the collective shock on their faces. The suspense was intoxicating, a private game of anticipation as I moved through the room. With each passing minute, the contrast grew sharper. My modest appearance, my silent composure, set against their unearned arrogance. They thought they were in control, but the truth waited, silent and inevitable, ready to strike. And in that moment, I realized how sweet the first taste of their astonishment would be. The laughter around me grew louder, sharper, cutting through the polite chatter like knives. "I hope you didn't skip dessert again, Beggar," my cousin jeered, eyes glinting with amusement. My aunt added, "Maybe next year you can finally afford a proper gift," her tone syrupy with mock concern. Each remark was calculated to wound, and yet I felt no anger, only a quiet, simmering satisfaction. Every insult confirmed how deeply they underestimated me, how blind they were to the life I had quietly built while they flaunted their privilege. I smiled inwardly, letting them talk, letting the room fill with their arrogance. Their assumptions about my financial status, their casual dismissals, were feeding the perfect setup for the reversal I had carefully planned. I imagined the moment when their laughter would falter, when disbelief would replace smugness, when the power dynamic would invert entirely. With each jab, the suspense built, a crescendo I felt in my chest as I envisioned the shock on their faces. I was calm, collected and invisible in plain sight. The beggar they mocked, already the master of the stage. Every sarcastic comment, every condescending glance, was a thread weaving toward the inevitable moment when the truth would emerge, unstoppable and undeniable. As the evening progressed, I allowed the small surprises to unfold. The band struck up a song I had personally selected, perfectly timed to match the theme I'd designed months ago. The waitstaff moved seamlessly, following a schedule I had coordinated, every detail planned to precision. A cousin whispered about how lucky the family was to have secured such flawless arrangements, and I let a subtle smile cross my lips, hiding the satisfaction behind my calm demeanor. When my uncle commented on how smoothly the dinner was running, I casually mentioned the contracts, as if I had merely assisted with some paperwork. The room froze. Eyes widened. Confused glances darted between each other, whispers rising in a mix of shock and disbelief. "Wait, she arranged this?" My aunt stammered. She's responsible for all this?" murmured my cousin, disbelief lacing the words. Their laughter faltered, replaced by a creeping tension as reality began to sink in. The beggar they had mocked, the one they assumed powerless and irrelevant, was the architect of the evening itself. I let the pause linger, savoring the subtle humiliation radiating from them. They shifted awkwardly, uncertain how to respond, the dominance they had wielded for years slipping from their grasp. Their carefully constructed airs of superiority, their assumptions that I was meek and incapable, now felt fragile, exposed. Every compliment they had given me before, every dismissive remark, now echoed back as proof of their blindness. I had taken their laughter, their mockery, and turned it into a quiet demonstration of control. For the first time that night, I felt the thrill of power settle fully within me. The first reversal, public yet understated, setting the stage for even greater surprises to come. Once the shock had settled into a thick, Uneasy silence. I decided to pull gently on the next thread. My aunt, still flustered, tried to recover her composure by gesturing proudly to the grand floral arch near the stage. "At least the decorations turned out beautifully," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Oh, the decor? I'm glad you like it. I designed that theme myself, had the arrangements shipped in from a boutique I own." The silence deepened. The sound of forks pausing midair. Then my gaze drifted to the gleaming mountain of wrapped gifts near the podium. "And those," I added softly, "were donated by one of my companies for tonight's raffle. Consider it a contribution." Murmurs rippled across the room, disbelief spreading like wildfire. My uncle blinked hard, as if trying to reconcile the image of the woman they'd ridiculed with the one now unveiling quiet dominance. The chandeliers, the band, the imported desserts. They began to realize none of it was truly theirs. The illusion of status they had so proudly paraded had always belonged to me. Watching their faces shift, from confusion to denial to dawning humiliation, was almost poetic. The audience within the story, and those listening beyond it, could feel the reversal snap into place. Every object of their vanity was now a reflection of my power. I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice. I simply let the truth speak through every gleaming surface and every whisper spreading across the hall. For years, they had measured worth in displays of wealth and control. Now, those very symbols stood as silent witnesses to their arrogance and to my vindication. The balance had shifted entirely, and for the first time, they were the ones shrinking in discomfort, while I stood quietly in command. The moment had arrived. I stood near the center of the room, letting my calm settle over the crowd like a quiet storm. "I think it's time everyone knows," I said softly, yet every ear turned toward me. "This entire evening, the venue, the catering, the entertainment, even the gifts, has been arranged and funded by me." A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by stunned silence. Faces went pale, eyes darting from one family member to another, searching for confirmation, for some sign I was joking. My cousin's jaw dropped and he stammered, But, that's impossible, you can't." His voice faltered, swallowed by the room's growing tension. My aunt clutched her pearls, shaking her head as if denying reality could somehow undo it. My uncle turned sharply, his face a mixture of disbelief and rising anger, fumbling for words that didn't exist. I let the silence linger, savoring the dramatic reversal. The family that had mocked me, excluded me, and called me a beggar now realized they were guests in my world, not masters of it. Their assumed superiority evaporated in an instant, replaced by confusion, shame, and the bitter taste of being wrong. Every carefully hidden thread of influence I had woven months ago snapped into clarity. "You see," I continued, my voice steady, "while you were busy flaunting what you thought was yours, I was quietly building everything you never noticed. And tonight, you're celebrating on my terms." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of awe and humiliation as reality hit them fully. Their status, once so proudly displayed, was now a reflection of my control, my foresight, my quiet power. Eyes that had once sneered at me now flicked toward me with disbelief, some avoiding direct gaze altogether. Their laughter had died, replaced by the awkward shifting of those who suddenly understood the truth. And in that charged silence, I felt the culmination of every slight, every insult, every ignored birthday come to its peak. I had transformed from the mocked and dismissed into the orchestrator, the one holding the ultimate advantage. For the first time, the balance was undeniable. The beggar they had scorned had become the architect of their evening, the silent master of their supposed dominion. Every glance, every whispered apology, every hesitant smile from them underscored the reversal. I had waited patiently, played my part quietly, and now, the public revelation delivered the payoff they could never have anticipated. The emotional satisfaction, both for me and for anyone who had ever been overlooked or underestimated, was electric, a vindication so complete it left no room for argument or doubt. The silence that followed was almost sacred. I could feel the weight of every stare, the rustle of discomfort as my family struggled to process what had just unfolded. My mother's eyes darted between the chandeliers and the marble floor, as if looking for a way to erase the embarrassment. My brother, who once mocked me for never making it, stared at the ground, lips trembling, his arrogance dissolving into quiet shame. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't in their humiliation. It was in my calm. The storm inside me had settled, replaced by a strange peace I hadn't expected. For years I'd imagined this moment as fiery and loud, full of shouting and vindictive triumph. But standing there, surrounded by their silence, I realized real power didn't need to scream. It could simply exist, steady, undeniable, and earned. A small part of me wanted to comfort them, to say this wasn't about revenge but balance. Yet I also knew they needed this silence, the sting of realization, the space to see themselves clearly. I thought about the years I'd been treated as less, the dinners where my voice had gone unheard, the celebrations I'd watched from the edges. That pain had built something stronger than resentment. It had built resolve. Looking around the room, I saw not enemies but people stripped of illusion. Their wealth, their pride, their hierarchy, it all seemed suddenly small. My victory wasn't their downfall. It was my freedom. For once, I was no longer defined by their approval or rejection. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. So I stood there, steady and silent, letting the moment breathe. My calm wasn't weakness. It was the final act of control. In choosing grace over fury, I'd become everything they thought I couldn't be. As the evening wound down, the atmosphere shifted subtly. A few relatives approached cautiously, murmuring apologies, their voices tentative and awkward. Some avoided eye contact entirely, choosing instead to sulk in corners, nursing bruised egos they hadn't expected to feel. I accepted a handful of apologies with quiet grace, nodding and smiling just enough to acknowledge them without giving power back. Walking toward the exit, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. The weight of years spent proving myself, of silenced frustrations and ignored achievements, had finally lifted. I didn't need their validation anymore. The satisfaction was mine, internal and complete. Each step away from the hall reinforced my growth, the calm confidence replacing old anger and resentment. The night wasn't just about revenge. It was about clarity. I had navigated humiliation, cultivated strength in secrecy, and emerged empowered, unshaken by their judgments. As I stepped into the quiet night, I carried more than victory. I carried self-worth, resilience, and the understanding that true power lies not in proving others wrong, but in owning your own story. As I reflect on that night, I realize the true lesson wasn't in the embarrassment I caused or the control I wielded. It was in what I learned about myself. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned silently, patiently, and consistently. Value isn't measured by recognition from those who fail to see it, but by the quiet strength you cultivate within. And self-worth isn't something handed to you by family, friends, or society. It's claimed, nurtured, and defended with integrity. I could have sought loud revenge, shouted my triumph from every rooftop, but the satisfaction I feel comes from restraint and awareness. Watching my family grapple with their arrogance was gratifying, yes, but the real victory was internal. Knowing I had stayed true to myself, acted with intelligence, and achieved justice without compromising my principles. For anyone who has been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, the takeaway is simple. Emotional justice, calm, deliberate, and earned, is far more satisfying than any impulsive retaliation. Power comes not from proving others wrong in anger, but from proving to yourself that you can rise above, quietly and completely. That night, I walked away not just victorious, but transformed. A living reminder that patience, strategy, and self-respect are the ultimate forms of revenge.